Definitely no 5-star reads, but we definitely found a 1-star. Hi, welcome or welcome back. As you can probably tell from the title of this video, we're going to be going through all of the books that I read in January. Okay, let's get started. First book, The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. So this is a thriller and it's set in Paris, of course, at a certain apartment building complex, and we're following this girl and she's going to visit her brother, and she's arriving in Paris that day and she hasn't heard from her brother in a little while and she's starting to get very nervous. When she gets to his apartment, he's not there and she can tell that something not good has happened based on what she can see in the apartment. So the whole book is kind of following her trying to figure out where her brother is. Is he alive? Is he kidnapped? Why would anybody want to harm her brother? And as we move through the book, she gets to know everybody in the apartment building and tries to piece together who knew her brother. Did they have anything to do with what was going on? Is there something bigger at play? Ultimately, we go back and forth between a lot of different points of view. So we have the main character, and then we have the points of views of so many other people within the apartment building that she is kind of working with to figure out what actually happened. So it's a pretty generic plot line. The thing about this for me is when you have such a generic plot line, you kind of need to make the story punchy or have something different or captivating to really make it a more compelling read. And I just found this book didn't have that, which is why I think I rated it maybe a 2 stars, and I feel like I was being quite generous with that rating actually. So take that review as you will. You might like it. I personally didn't think it was that great. Okay, the next. Dune, the first part of the trilogy. Now, when I tell you this was such a difficult book to get into and even follow, I felt like I didn't know how to read, like I couldn't follow a storyline, and the farther in that I got, the more I realized that I think that was kind of just the writing style. There was a lot of jumping around, a lot of information that you kind of had to fill in on your own. It would be like 2 years have passed and I was like, did I just fall asleep while reading one of the last chapters? Or what? But it's like you kind of have to fill in that information on your own. I don't love that. I do like some of the characters. I think the idea of trying to make, gosh, what is the planet's name? Trying to make Arrakis a viable planet to live on, where it's lush and full of water, and where the people on the planet don't have to conserve every ounce of moisture that their body possibly produces in order to survive. So I find that premise interesting. There were some really strong characters. Overall, I think I did rate it pretty high. I would change that rating now and it would be a little bit lower because this is a good book. Don't love it. Having said that, I am going to continue reading the rest of the series because I am curious to know how these characters turn out and what their life is going to look like and what they're going to be able to do with this planet. So that's exciting. The next book, A Sociopath's Guide to a Successful Marriage. Now, this was so fun to read. Super easy read, very, very quick. I'm not even really sure what to call it. A thriller, I guess. Fiction, of course. So in this, we're following Lala, and the book starts with a bang. So Lala is married and she has 2 children, and the opening kind of first chapter is about Lala hosting a birthday party for her son. So she has all of his friends coming over and their parents. Now, before everybody arrives, we find out that Lala has just killed a man in her dining room or one of the rooms off of like the main area where everybody's going to be. So we get to see how she kind of navigates that and how just nonchalant she is about the whole situation. She doesn't really care. She's like, yeah, I hope nobody goes in that room. I'll deal with him later. God, we're here listening to her inner monologue. Anyway, that opening scene, it gives you a little taste of what the rest of the book is going to be like. And she's not going through anything really profound, and her struggles are not, you know, they're pretty mundane. Like, she wants her daughter to get into this really prestigious school. She wants a new house in the suburbs outside of London or in London, this really expensive house that her and her husband can't really afford, but she's going to make it happen regardless. So we're ultimately following how she achieves all of these things that she wants and how she will stop at nothing to get them. And if anybody gets in her way, she'll do anything she can to make sure that they are not in her way anymore, whether that is disparaging them, blackmail, or murder, quite frankly. And as we go along that journey, we get to see her interact with her friends and interact with people in everyday life, and just how she handles situations, and also how she might present herself. But we get to hear her inner monologue of what she would actually really want to say, or how she would want to present herself to these people. And it's just really funny, because I'm sure some of us often, you know, we say one thing, but inside we're thinking like, I wish I could just say this if it wasn't going to be taken so offensively or in such a rude way, or if it was not polite. So anyway, I think this was a really fun book. I think I rated it a 3, and that's just because it's, you know, it's a fast, easy read. There's not a whole lot of depth to it, but it's worth it in my opinion. The Raven Scholar. Number one, I just love holding this book. I love how big it is. I love a nice long book. It makes me very happy. This is a fantasy and also kind of a murder mystery. So we're in the Empire of Oran, and there's the Festival of Eight that's going to be happening. And this festival happens every couple of decades, and it occurs in order to choose a new emperor. So there are 8 different houses, and they're like foxes or ravens or tigers, dragons, etc. So a representative is chosen from each of these houses to compete in this battle to see who is going to be the new emperor. Our protagonist, Nima, is a raven, and they're very witty and intelligent, scholarly, as you can probably tell from the title. It's called The Raven Scholar. She's not chosen to be the contestant for the Ravens. Another girl is, but that girl gets murdered before the event is actually supposed to take place. So Nima now has to take her place, and she also is going to be the one who is investigating the murder to try and uncover what is going on, if there's something more sinister lying beneath the surface. Can she trust the people that she's in the competition with? Can she trust the emperor? And we go into just a whole kind of backstory of how the previous emperor won the throne, and what that did to the family that lost. So it's a really interesting mix of magic and politics and mystery, and it was really fun. However, since reading the ACOTAR series, it's really difficult for a fantasy to measure up, and I found that this, while I did enjoy it, it started off really, really fast. I was flying through it, and then about halfway through, I was like, it was a bit of a struggle trying to finish it. It wasn't like a super captivating ending for me anyway. Maybe my expectations were too high, because the ACOTAR series is just 10 out of 10 for me. So I don't know that anything can really compare. And there are more books in this series. I can't remember if it's a duology or a trilogy. So, and I don't know if I'm going to continue on with it. I probably will. But either way, it was still a fun read. It is a good fantasy. And I think I ranked this like 3.75 stars, maybe. And I would stick to that. I think that's a fair rank. The next book is Scaffolding by Lauren Elkin. So this is a literary fiction, and we're following 2 separate timelines of 2 different couples who lived in the same apartment in Paris, one in the 70s and one in present day. And they're both struggling with either miscarriages or trying to build a family, or their relationship and trying to navigate the struggles of being married. It was interesting and it was fun to read. The family that we're following in present day, the main person we're following in present day is Anna, who is a psychoanalyst. So she actually had a miscarriage and she's been really struggling with that. She hasn't been working and she's just been trying to ultimately renovate her apartment while her partner is in London working. And she meets one of her neighbors, Clementine, and they form a relationship and a really close bond. And we're kind of just following her through her processing of grief and her figuring out what she wants from life and who she is and where she wants to go. So in the same apartment decades before Anna is living in the Paris apartment, Florence and Henry are in the same apartment and they're renovating the kitchen. Florence is finishing her psychology degree. She really wants to have a child. Henry doesn't really want to have a child. He's not ready to be a father. She's very adamant about this though. She also is having an affair with one of her professors or her advisor. I can't exactly remember who he is. And then we find out that Henry ends up doing that too with someone that he meets through a friend of his. And so we're kind of trying to follow how they navigate their marriage, how they navigate fidelity, how they navigate family life, in what they want from life really, and how they try to work through that in a constructive and productive way. So overall, it is an interesting book to follow. I had high hopes for this, and I think that was my problem. It was really good. I would recommend reading it, but I didn't love it. It was just fun. It was okay. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. The next book I don't have a physical copy of, but it's called Britt Marie Was Here, and it's by Fredrik Backman, who is one of my favorite authors. And this did not disappoint. His books never disappoint. It was so beautifully written and constructed. Britt Marie is such a charming and endearing character that you just can't help but fall in love with. She's very quirky, very strong in her opinions of how things should be, how life should be, how structured her day should be. So we're finding her after she figures out that her husband, Kent, has been cheating on her. She's kind of floundering, trying to figure out what she should do, how she can spend her days now, and she ends up applying for a job in a really small town of Borg. So in her new role, she's the caretaker of a recreation facility. And as a result, she then becomes the coach of the children's soccer team that's in Borg. The kids are very, very passionate. And because it's such a small town, they don't have a whole lot else to do. So they really rely heavily on soccer as a way to bring them together and bring the community together and keep the kids safe and happy, ultimately. And Britt Marie is very much not happy in this town, or she has a lot of things that she wants to complain about. But we see over time how she learns so much from the people who live in the town and how they kind of help her find her path and her own power and strength as a single woman. And we get to see how important her tenacity is in creating a better town and a better community for everyone who lives in Borg. So it's really beautiful. Again, there are a few people who capture the human condition like Fredrik Backman does, and how these small, seemingly inconsequential interactions you have with people can really change your life or change their life, and how much you can mean to people and how much they can mean to you. It was just beautiful. I think I gave that probably 4 or 4.5 stars. So it was really good. The next book I also don't have. It was a poetry book, and I have read it before, but it was a reread for me this month. And it was actually Megan Fox's poetry book called Pretty Boys Are Poisonous. And reading it through the second time, I really loved how she found her voice, and she was not afraid to share some really harrowing stories of her experiences in the past. And it's brave to do that, because I think that we can so quickly judge people's choices and judge women's choices and question, well, why would you stay with somebody if that's happening to you? Or why would you continue to be with people who are not treating you properly? And there's just a lot of room for criticism, but it was really powerful to read, and it was really inspiring to see her finding her voice and communicating her story through her own words, and some really eloquent poems. I must say, I really did enjoy it. The last book. Now, Woman Down by Colleen Hoover. This book. So Petra is a prolific author. She's currently being canceled because one of her books was being adapted as a movie, and that failed miserably. Partly to do with some text messages and things that came to light about Petra's involvement in cutting out one of the most significant characters in the novel, and fans were just absolutely outraged, and she had lied and said that she had no control over the situation. Anyway, in an attempt to kind of reclaim her power or fame, she goes to a cabin as kind of a writing retreat so she can get going on her next novel. And her next novel is a love triangle, and we're following Cam and Rhea in that novel. And we figure out that Petra is having a really difficult time writing it because she hasn't experienced the things that her characters have experienced. Like, she's never had an affair, she's never been with a man who's super possessive and controlling like Cam is. She's never kissed a married man. All of these different things. Anyway, this guy Saint shows up at her house. Ultimately, like, her dream come true. He's married. And everything kind of starts to unfold from there. So they start to have an affair, and just the language that's being used in this and how excited she is about having an affair with this man, and I'm not trying to judge the character of Petra, but just how like little guilt she's showing or remorse for anything, and their dynamic is just really uncomfortable and awful, and he starts to become exactly like the character that she's writing about, like possessive, stalking her, being violent towards her. And we see her almost like questioning her own sanity, like, did she ask for these things to happen to her, but then almost enjoying it. And I just found that to be a really hard thing to read about, because it was just not well done. It wasn't handled with care, I don't think. And I think those are topics and themes that, if you're going to be talking about them, like, don't glamorize them or glorify them. So also, I think the writing was really, really not good. I didn't think this was a well-constructed book. It's so far, they think, the lowest rank for a book that I've ever finished. I ranked it a 1, and I was trying to be generous in doing that, because there is a character in here, the neighbor at this retreat that Petra's at, or this cabin, sorry, that Petra is at, and that neighbor she's very funny and very charming. But overall, like, God, this is one of the, for me personally, again, I don't want anybody to take that as a judgment. If you liked this book, I'm so happy that you did. This just wasn't for me. But yeah, this is, quite frankly, the worst book I've read in a long time. Maybe ever. So, yeah. So those are the 8 books that I read in January. And definitely no 5-star reads, but we definitely found a 1-star for sure. So it was a success, I guess. Anyway, thank you so much for watching.